The building block of most jobs and how we think about work is the job. I mean, our guest today says that we need to change that. He suggests that we need to build a skills powered organization. And if you want to know what he means and how that could change your organization and your career, you're in the right place. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively, make a bigger positive difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this, you could have been with us live, or I guess you could be with us in the future for live episodes on your favorite social platform. You can, maybe not your favorite, but we are on several. You can get access to those live episodes and therefore interact with us and see them sooner by joining our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to learn when they're happening and know how to join us. Today's episode is brought to you by my latest book, Flexible Leadership: Navigate Uncertainty and Lead with Confidence. It's time to realize that styles can get in our way and that following our strengths might not always be the best approach. In a world that's more complex and uncertain than ever, leaders need a new perspective and a new set of tools to create great results for their organizations and their team members. That's what flexible leadership is all about. Learn more. Order your copy now. remarkablepodcast.com/flexible. remarkablepodcast.com/flexible. And so with that, I'm going to bring in my guest and I'm going to do the hardest part of this episode. I'm going to introduce him and try to get his name perfectly right. His name is Ravin Jesuthasan. He is our guest. He's written this fabulous book, and I'm excited to have him join us. He is a recognized futurist and authority on the future of work, human capital, and AI. He is a senior partner and global leader for transformation services at Mercer. He is a member of the World Economic Forum's Future Skills Executive Board and Global Foresight Network. He is a member of the faculty at Caltech. He's the co-author of a number of books, including the Wall Street Journal bestseller, Work Without Jobs, also Transformative HR, Lead the Work, and Reinventing Jobs. But his latest book, he's also co-authored. It is called The Skills Powered Organization: The Journey to the Next Generation Enterprise. And with that, Ravin, welcome. So glad to have you here for us to have a chat about some of these ideas that I think are things that most people haven't thought about, but I believe that after this conversation, they will be thinking about. So let's start here. What sort of led to this book? I mean, I gave that brief introduction, sort of gave a bit of the arc, and the titles of the books give us a clue, but why this book specifically?
Yeah. Well, firstly, thank you for having me on, Kevin. It's lovely to be here with you. And hello from London. So this book really is the continuation of work that I had started with my previous co-author, John Boudreau, whom I'd written 4 books with. And if you don't mind me, I'll do a bit of a quick retrospective. In
Please.
our second book together, which was called Lead the Work: Navigating a World Beyond Employment, what we started to show, Kevin, was the opportunities for organizations to think beyond that legacy relationship between a person and a position, that legacy way in which work has been done for the better part of 140 years. And in that book, talked about how more and more work was escaping the traditional organizational boundary as gig work was starting to permeate our economy. You fast forward to our third book together, Reinventing Jobs, and we overlaid the impact of artificial intelligence and process automation with about 135 case studies, beginning the work of documenting what a new operating model would look like. Fast forward to Work Without Jobs, which has been called. Someone once said to me, like, "My gosh, it's like 2007 and the iPhone," which I really appreciated that comment. But in that book, we laid out what that new work operating system would look like. One built on the smaller building blocks of tasks and activities and skills, as opposed to those larger, more cumbersome building blocks of a job, because those smaller building blocks allowed us to solve different problems differently with the talent we had, with the machines we had, an opportunity to combine them in ever different combinations to solve many different problems. And then you fast forward to this book, and I was really privileged to have written this book with the Skills Powered organization with my co-author Tanuj, who is the Chief Strategy and Chief People Officer at Standard Chartered Bank. And what we really wanted was to write a book that was a practitioner's guide of how do you make skills the currency for work. Not easy by any means, because we as a society have a well north of 150-year legacy of work being done in jobs. But you know, the conditions for us to start to pivot away from just jobs as the currency for work are truly ripe. And I hope what we've done with this book is give business leaders, from CEOs to CFOs to CHROs, as well as individuals, as you think about navigating the next in your life, your career, hopefully built the case and provided them with tangible tools, frameworks, methodologies, and case studies to illustrate the art of the possible of how you go about making skills the currency of work.
So one of the things that I thought about as I was reading, and even as I was just thinking, listening to what you were saying, is that I grew up in a small family business, and I run a larger than that, but still small business relative to most, with 15 of us. And what I realized, as I was reading, was that I think this is relatively easy to think about in a small organization. I don't think all small organizations do it. Don't misunderstand me. I think the best of them do. I would like to think that my team does. And yet, the bigger the organization gets, the harder and harder and harder it gets. So I'd like you to let's just start there. Comment on that. Am I off base? Am I right about that so far?
You are absolutely right, Kevin. And the reason for that is you know exactly what every person can and cannot do, regardless of the quote unquote job that he or she sits in. And that has been the fundamental obstacle, right? It's as we scale up, how do we start to connect emerging work to the skills of the workforce above and beyond the particular job that person might sit in? It's also where AI has certainly been a key driver of that volatility and velocity that I talked about at the beginning, but it's also been a key enabler to provide the level of insight that you as an individual might have over your 15 people, to providing that same level of insight to Tanuj in her role as Chief Strategy Officer, having insight into the capabilities of 100,000 people who make up Standard Chartered Bank.
Yeah,
And we can
100%.
certainly dive deep into what that actually looks like. But I think that's been the most significant unlock, if you will, for why this topic of the skills powered organization has been such a hot one for the last couple of years or so.
Well, so let's talk about that. I mean, obviously, this book, as you laid out for us, is sort of the next step in a logical sequence if people are following you and reading your work. And yet, I think it's also safe to say that this, in part because of AI, as you mentioned, uh, we're really at a crossroads where if we can figure out how to be more skills powered or to be skills powered, we have a chance to create competitive advantage on lots of fronts. Why is now, other than AI, which we'll get to the AI piece, other than the AI component of this, what's the compelling argument or compelling reason for thinking about this today when we've been doing it a different way for 150 years?
Yeah. So a couple of things before I jump into that. One is, while this book builds on the previous books, it certainly stands alone. So, you don't have to read my previous books
I would agree.
to,
I
to
mean, I haven't read
get
the
the,
others and I didn't feel at a loss. I was just trying to put it in the arc of the rest. But
yes,
no, I would, as
absolutely.
a for all of you listening or watching as a reader, I would completely agree. Don't like I have to go back and read four others before I can read
Right.
this. I would
Okay.
agree with you 100%.
Excellent. So let me give you a sense, Kevin, and it comes from the work that when John Woodrow and I were writing Reinventing Jobs, what we started to see across these 135 case studies was that what had traditionally been our source of competitive advantage, right, in large companies, that legacy of, as my good friend and colleague Gary Bowles says, mindset, skill set, and tool set. That legacy of how we've done things, our customer relationships, our technology, our relationships with our people, that legacy was increasingly becoming the primary obstacle to the application of AI and realizing the possibilities from this new world of work. And that was truly eye-opening for us. And you fast forward from when we wrote that book in 2018 to in Davos this year. I was in a session with Sam Altman, and he made the comment, maybe some might say a little overstated, but I think the gist of it was right. He said, at no time in human history have we experienced the sheer volatility and velocity of change. And then 2 months later, the IMF came out and said their global uncertainty index, which they've been tracking for close to 50 years, was now 2.5 times, not 2.5%, but 2.5 times higher than the previous 30 years, which is saying something because we've had a fair bit of disruption the last 30 years. To say that that uncertainty index is off the charts. And there were four things, Kevin, that were sort of driving that, right? One is, like it or not, the climate crisis is real. And we see that playing out around the world in many communities. The energy impact from the war in Ukraine and the Middle East, the geopolitical issues that are impacting the world, whether again, the war in the Middle East, whether it's the tensions between the United States and China, etc. And then certainly the granddaddy of them all, the technology shock that has been unleashed on us with the impact of generative AI the last couple of years, which again builds on lots and lots of advances in, the earlier generations of AI and process automation. So any one of these things on their own would be a true shock for us. To have all four occurring at the same time and the multiplier effect of all four is what is driving the need for us to fundamentally rethink work. And what you see, I have this chart that I often use, and in the speeches that I give, we've always lived in a complicated world, Kevin, but we are now truly in a complex world. In a complicated world, structure is our friend, right? Because it affords us scale, efficiency, this traditional
We got
construct.
some knowns we can work with.
Precisely, yeah. Expertise, because the knowns are known, right? Expertise is the key determinant of how we respond to that complicated world. In a complex world, that playbook goes out the window. And what instead kicks in is a need for speed, agility, and an execution focus. How do I try, fail fast, learn, and iterate at scale and speed? And it changes how we think about work and how it's organized. We need less hierarchical structure and more leadership from the edges. We need less of those structures that are governed around keeping variance in tight zones. And as my friend and colleague Lena Nair, who's the CEO at Chanel, says, we need culture to be the new structure, a culture that organizes disparate interests into a common mission and purpose. And as we think about the skills of the workforce, from having a just-in-time model that worked really well for Henry Ford, right? When we think about the ordered processes of the assembly line, the ability to predict revenue growth to the third decimal point next year, which we can't do for next month. That model shifts from a just-in-time approach to the development of an organization of work to a just-in-case approach. Because I need a workforce that is multi-skilled, able to pivot at a moment's notice. And I need the insights into how we can do that. I need the demand signals to be able to sort of pivot that workforce. And I need an operating model that enables that talent to flow to work more seamlessly.
Yep, to shift to flow to work. You mentioned Gary Bowles, and I noticed it was in the book. And I don't know Gary as well as you, but I've had conversations with him and read his work. and he and I have had this conversation. He talks about mindset, skill set, tool set. We talk about mindset, skill set, habit set. And
Mm,
one of the challenges that all of this of making the shifts that you're talking about come from is the fact that we've got this habit of doing it the way we've done it for so very, very long. But there's
absolutely.
another thing. We're talking about skills, and that's important. Obviously, that's the focus of our conversation. I'm curious, because I'm going back to what you said about, well, if the leader's got 10 people, 15 people, 20 people, they probably know the skills of those folks, but they also know, hopefully, the goals of those folks and the aspirations of those folks. So where would
Yeah.
you put that into this model? Because we're now trying to say we want to think about every human as the fundamental component of how this fits together, which means it's more than just their skills, right? It's also their mindset and it is their aspirations and their goals. How does that fit into the model when we think about this at an enterprise level?
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think that that passion, right, that interest is what's key for anyone being good at anything, as we know. And so in the book, what we do early on is, as you'll remember, Kevin, we level set to say, when we talk about skills, what we're talking about is both the individual's, ability to perform a piece of work, and their expression of those skills in the form of capabilities that result in the proficient execution of work. And we also define skills as both, what have been in the past we would call hard skills. We prefer technical skills. And then what in the past was somewhat pejoratively called soft skills, we prefer human or enabling skills. Because the thing that we've consistently seen is that it's the combination of both of those two that is critical to ensuring that skills translate into productive work. And so, one of the key benefits I think that we have, going back to your earlier question about the power, what's fueling this is the power of AI to unearth someone's interests, the power of AI to unearth the skills that people might have that they often discount or ignore. And I'll share an example with you in a second. And the ability to suggest, hey, you're really passionate about this and you have these skills. This would be here's an opportunity for you to sort of combine those two to take on a piece of work that you might never have thought of. You might be a data scientist who's really passionate about gaming. Boy, an opportunity to build a scenario planning module for your strategy team as they look to as they look to plan for the next generation of what our products might look like. And I think that's where you start to see some really interesting opportunities to drive greater agility in how work is done.
And that's why, whether we want to call it a position or a role, the role of leader is still so important, because as a leader, we have a perspective that others don't necessarily see when they're doing the
Yeah.
work. And that, I think, is one of the key uh, things that leaders need to bring, regardless, but especially as we think about what we're talking about here, that perspective and that different view is critical and important. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, and you talk about it in the book, so I'm not trying to send you on a rabbit trail here, but what are the you list sort of 5 skills that are gonna be exceptionally important for leaders, and we don't need to have the whole list. I've got one I'd like us to talk about, but what would you say we should be thinking about from a leadership perspective in terms of skills?
Yeah. So there are actually two categories. You'll remember from the book, two categories of sort of leader capabilities, if you will, that we saw as being critical. One was this pivot from leading through, and I love the fact that you started with your business, Kevin, because think of how you lead as a leader, right? You don't rely on hierarchical authority as we almost always do in large companies, where the structure governs, these neatly ordered boxes are the foundation for how work gets done. To, I suspect, you lead with empowerment and alignment, insight into someone's passions,
I hope so.
someone's skills, and knowing that, Susie may not think she's good at that, but boy, I can see how she can make a difference there. So that's one thing. I think, and this is a really big one, Kevin, because we talk about the core capabilities of the Skills Powered organization. This notion of work design is truly becoming pivotal. The options we have for getting work done, gig workers, AI, process automation, shared services, centralization, nearshoring, offshoring. The savvy business leader, the next generation business leader, has to pivot from saying, new work has come, I'm going to open a requisition and fill a job, to actually understanding what is the work, what are my options for getting the work done, and how do I make the right choice with the right metrics, not just near term, but long term, for picking that option? And do I understand the secondary and tertiary considerations?
Yeah,
From
100%.
a tech from a technical view of automation to a much more humanistic view of automation. We have, particularly with Gen AI, as we look at the democratization of knowledge and creativity, we have lots and lots of examples of leaders who are making short-sighted decisions because there is an immediate bump to earnings per share. We did a study several months ago that looked at the companies who were, every time someone talked about using generative AI and what the bump to their stock price was, from the analyst
Yeah.
within the next 2 weeks, but a more humanistic view where we understand the nuances and long-term consequences. From an episodic view of thinking about how we make work more accessible to kind of an ongoing view of ensuring that we've got a pipeline of talent that is that has that represents the communities we're in, from a relatively low bar of digital savvy for leaders to true AI fluency. Every one of us, Kevin, needs to really understand what Chat GPT can do and what the next iteration of these large language models and AI will be. And then lastly, and probably the most significant one for us, I'll go back to my Henry Ford example. We've organized work in jobs and processes for for a long time, worked great in that complicated environment, in that complex environment. How do we stop thinking about the only way of getting work done is to connect people to the process, to thinking about how work is connected to the skills of the workforce you have?
Yep. Yeah, we could have an entire conversation on that one point, but I promised at the start we would talk a little bit more about the AI piece. And I did note that you did name drop Sam Altman. You did a session with Sam Altman. I just want everyone to note that when they're on the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, you never know who might show up here. So I do want to go to the AI piece for a second. And so how you've talked about AI, and it's a big part of the book, but in terms of sort of starting to wrap our conversation, we've talked about it here, you've talked about it here from the context of it's a driver of the change. It's a
Mhm.
it's a creator for the compelling need to change. But I want to have you talk for a minute about how can it help us make the transformation happen rather than being a poke.
Yeah,
And a prod, how can it be an enabler to us
yeah,
if we really want to start to think less process focused, more project
yeah,
focused? If we want to think less job and job title and more skill and capability, then how can AI help us with that transformation?
yeah. So let me sort of break it down to sort of its brass tacks. So in the model we have today, right, one-to-one relationship between a degree, a person, and a position. HR functions, business leaders easily able to manage how I progress in the organization, how I'm connected to work, because the building blocks are really simple. When we think about skills, now I've got the unique bundle of skills that's Kevin and the unique bundle of skills that's Robin. What you go from is that one-to-one relationship that is easily managed by our simple minds to the many to many, and the numerous ways in which I can tap Kevin's interests, his skills, his potential to acquire new skills and
Yep.
connect them to opportunities. And so what AI does is it generates insights, and I'm going to give you a specific example in a second. It generates insights. it creates the matchmaking or the market making capability, and it creates the nudges. And here's what I mean by that, just to pick on those three things. In terms of insights, we did an experiment at the World Economic Forum with one of the consumer goods sectors. Or I should say, the World Economic Forum did the experiment. And I had the privilege of watching the experiment. And it was about looking at industry transition of talent. If let's say this particular industry was starting to change its business model and didn't need so much of these skills, could those skills be moved to another part of the industry? So I did this with the consumer goods sector, everyone from Unilever to Walmart to IKEA, etc. And we asked people, tell us your skills. The average list was about 7 deep, and most people only told you their technical skills. Oh, I can do analytics, I can do process design. And then you had the algorithm go through and infer people's skills from their work history, from their education, the fact that Kevin has led a multinational team with 8 people from 8 countries means he's got cross-cultural sensitivity, got great communication skills, etc. And the average list was 28 deep. And it put people in a position of saying, oh yeah, when you shared that list, it was like, oh yeah, I didn't think communication was a skill. I didn't think critical thinking was a skill. But it put people in a position of verifying and validating their skills. And so that level of insight was the first thing, right? The second thing was the ability of AI to sort of be the matchmaker. There are tons of organizations with these internal talent marketplaces. And what these marketplaces do is take those inferred skills, match them up against who has, who has a passion for this type of work, who's interested in this, who's got the capacity and space to take on work, and connecting them to opportunities seamlessly. If you think of how we've traditionally done this manually, all I would do is I'd figure out, well, Kevin's ready to move up a role because his boss is retiring, or Kevin's interested in moving from finance into IT, and here's an opening. A deeply manual process done by a business leader and someone from HR. And now you've got this massive volume of data populating and powering the many to many and the numerous ways in which people can be connected to work. Unilever was one of the first companies to recognize this, and in 2018 introduced a marketplace. And today, all 70,000 white-collar workers at Unilever have the opportunity to create projects and post them to the marketplace and take on projects or assignments that they're passionate about, that they have the skills to do. So that's the second part about the matchmaking. And the third part of this is around how do we sort of sustain the work and nudge people. We've got a great case study you may remember in the book, Kevin, of a insurance company that moved all its data scientists from being in a traditional job-based model to being in what we call a flow model. And so people were still employees, but they were connecting to work through their skills to projects and assignments and gigs. And the algorithm, as more work was done, would learn, it would say, Kevin, you're a great Python developer, but you know what? Demand for Python in our organization is trending down, but demand for Julia is trending up. Here are access to the 2 learning resources you need to be upskilled in Julia, to be able to keep contributing to our organization. And because we have a skills-based pay architecture, today you've got this market premium based on our ability to commercialize Python skills. A year from now, when we revisit those premiums, your premium, if you choose not to be upskilled, it's likely that your premium will be adjusted down. But if you choose to be upskilled, it's more than likely that your premium will be adjusted up because the demand for those skills in our business is going up.
It's growing. Yep, absolutely. I knew, everyone, that when we started this conversation, it was going to the kind thing would be give you lots to think about. The less kind thing would be make your head explode. And I hope the answer for you personally is somewhere between those two things. My head, you all can, some of you are watching me, and so my head has not exploded, but I certainly have plenty to think about and talk about. And with our team moving forward, I want to ask a couple of more questions, sort of shifting gears,
Mhm.
Ravin, before we finish. And one of those is, I'm curious, when we have the chance to interact with these really insightful, wise, smart, accomplished people here, I always want to know what they do for fun. What do you do for fun?
Oh, Kevin, the fact that I've written now 6 books in 12 years tells you, my choices leave a lot to be desired.
Well,
But
you're making choices. At least you recognize them as choices.
right,
I hope that you derive at least some pleasure from the writing process.
I do.
And yet I know that it's not all pleasure. So you got to give me something else.
Yes. So I really enjoy golf. It's my quiet time. It's also probably my wife's salvation because she gets her quiet time too. And I'm a deeply rabid and passionate fan of Tottenham Hotspur Football Club in the UK. I grew up in the UK. I've been a fan of Tottenham Hotspur since 1979. They're a mediocre, middling team. So it's actually quite, I don't know if it relieves stress as much as incites more stress, actually. Um, but they are my passion.
I love that. One other question, well, two other questions, but the next one is the only one you knew I was going to ask you. What are you reading these days?
So I've actually just started reading War by Bob Woodward, which is proving to be quite eye-opening.
Awesome. We will put the link to that as well as the link to the Skills Powered Organization on the website, on the show notes, and all that sort of thing. But I'm curious, where can people learn more about you? Where do you want to point people? They want to find the book. They want to find you. Where should they go? I'll hold the book up here for those watching
Yep,
while you do that.
absolutely. So I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on X. My website is ravinjesuthasan.com, and the website for the book, where people can download a free excerpt, is the skillspoweredorganization.com.
Skillspoweredorganization.com. We'll have both of those links on the show notes as well. Hope that you will connect with those things. And so before we go, everyone, and before I thank Ravin for being here, my question that I have for all of you, if you've been here before, you know what it is, because I can be predictable in some ways. And here it is. Now what? What action will you take as a result of being here? What did you take from this that not you won't just find interesting, but you will find actionable? And so maybe you got some new ideas about how to use and even think about AI. Maybe you were uh, convicted a bit about how you're choosing to think about and using chat gpt and tools of its ilk. Maybe you want to spend some time thinking about the connection between the technical skills and the human skills and how they are being valued by you or in your organization. I don't know what those, maybe you want to start thinking about work design or work redesign, even if you're just a manager in the middle. I'm just challenge you to take action on what you got, because if you don't, the value of our time together is diminished, and our time, of course, is valuable. I appreciate that you spent some of it with us today. Ravin, thank you so much for being here. It was so much fun to have you. I really enjoyed our conversation, learned a lot, and I hope that you feel the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on your show, Kevin.
It was my pleasure. So, everybody, you know the drill. You've been here, so you want to come back. And if you've been here before, hopefully you're already subscribed wherever you're viewing this. If you're not, now's the chance to do that. Make sure you refer someone else to come watch or listen to this one or any other episode. And please do come back next week for another episode of, because there will be another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.